Oh,
in
it's chilly now.
Kolkata. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
really chilly.
because
Okay, okay. So last day we discussed about this Levi-Strauss paradox, right? So in
yeah,
this paradox, what he actually did, he said that he assumed that and he predicted that this particular protein structuring and modeling, this protein folding, is not at all a trial and error method. It
mhm,
has a few fixed residues and it knows how to bond, where to bond. It's like
yeah,
it has some predefined memories as to how to fold itself. Now to but what is the basic strategy of this protein folding? Because many people have tried, they have already, and still now people does not know clearly how the protein folds. Yes, we know that there are this kind of interaction happens, protein folds like this and that, but still there are
mhm,
several minute details that are still missing. So the
yeah,
general principle of protein folding is with the folding funnel. Now, generally, earlier people used to predict that suppose if it's a folding funnel and this is an energy funnel, okay, where
mhm,
the topmost part has highest amount of energy
yeah, mhm,
and the bottom has the minimum energy. Okay. Now, people predicted that if a protein is in unfolded condition, then it's in a energetically higher variation.
higher. Mhm,
It has high amount of energy and that's why it is unfolded. For example, if you are too excited, if you we are too excited about something, if we are filled and bubbling with energy, are we going to lie
mhm.
down on the bed? No,
No,
we are going to simply move around a lot, and that same thing happens with the protein. If the protein gets full of energy, and if it has some higher energy structure inbuilt onto it, then it will do? It will simply unfold. It is not going to maintain its proper folding patterns.
okay,
Okay, so as a result, this energy and this protein is going to be present at this topmost part, and as gradually the protein starts folding or then the energy of the protein starts to get minimized,
okay,
and
mhm,
as the energy starts minimizing, the protein gradually starts going down through this particular folding funnel.
mhm,
Okay, so that's the basic idea. But now
okay,
people have and that's why people have found that yes, due to this particular energy map, what happens is that protein simply folds into something as its energies gets minimized.
mhm,
But later on, as we developed molecular dynamics simulation and all, people found that that's not true, because this funnel is not a straight funnel. It is
yeah,
like it's like a trekking through some hilly areas.
mhm,
And what happens in hilly areas? In hilly areas, we know that before we reach a final peak, there are multiple peaks, right?
yeah, mhm,
And there are multiple valleys also. So
yeah,
once you go down at this particular area, this is the energetically minimum position. But to come to this particular end here, you again have to move through some local energy barriers. These are local
yeah,
energy barriers that you have to cross to go down to a further minimized state. So this is the actual state that people are really in. This is the actual state people found that protein moves through this. And how
yeah,
does it do so? The basic thing that it does is there are some basic entities like the non-polar groups. First of all, what protein does, it simply keeps its all non-polar group away from the water, and they are buried inside.
okay,
They are first of all they are buried inside, and after that, and after these non-polar groups are buried inside, the proteins or the hydrophilic moieties are generally kept on the surface, and then protein starts to make those minute interaction like those hydrogen bonds, the van der Waals interaction, the electrostatic interaction. These all then comes into play, and they favors the formation of that accurate structure.
yeah,
Okay, and now, but as people predicted that, now see, once you are in this energetically minimized condition, now if you want to again cross this energy barrier or this local energetically higher state, then what you have to do? You have to unfold again, right?
Yeah.
You have to unfold, because as the as the protein is fed with energy, what happens? These bonds break up, because this van der Waals interaction, this electrostatic interaction, they are all possible in a very short range of they are all short range connections, right? For example, if two amino acids, they are separated by 1.1 Armstrong, 2 Armstrong, 3 Armstrong, you are going to get a very great amount of van der Waals interaction, electrostatic interaction between them. But if
Yeah.
the distance increases, then what happens?
It's gonna be low.
Yeah, it's going to be low. It's going to be low. And as it is, and now these interactions, this van der Waals electrostatic, they are never going to be zero for a particular protein. Always, even if the two amino acids are separated by suppose 10 Armstrong or 12 Armstrong or 20 Armstrong, obviously they are not going to have any appreciable effect onto their conformation, but still, according to the mathematics, they are going to have some very low amount of electrostatic interaction among them also. But
Yeah.
that's not going to matter. But mathematically, it's going to be there. Now, as you are feeding this particular state with this energy, it is again going to unfold. And so now,
Yeah.
first of all, the protein is here. So what happens at the very beginning? These non-polar groups are buried inside, and as it is buried inside, what happens? And these non-polar groups are buried inside by the hydrophobic effect, right? So as soon as the hydrophobic effect plays, the protein moves to the local minima,
Okay.
and it reaches this local minima. Now, once it reaches this local minima, now the protein sees that yes, there are few hydrophobic entities that ought to be present at the surface. Those are required for their participation into some interactions and all. Now, as a result, the protein will now have to unfold, and as it now have to unfold, it will cross the local maxima. These are the local maxima. This is the global maxima. These are the local maxima. So again, protein has to cross the local maxima, and as the protein crosses the local maxima, it unfolds slightly, and the residues that needs to be refolded or needs to be placed at a different location, they are done so. And again, as it starts to move down, it reaches another local minima, and the protein folds into a much what should I say, a more potent structure, but that's not the ultimate folded structure. Now again, when it reaches here, it has some folded structure. Then again, it has to cross some local minima, and like this, it crosses several local minima and local maxima until it reaches the global minima. At that particular global minima, it has the lowest and minimum amount of energy in it,
Yeah.
and it has the most basic and fixed minimized structure. And even in molecular dynamics simulation, we have to achieve this minimization. Even when you have some proteins, we dock some proteins, after that we have to perform this minimization, where this protein is again taken through these several local maxima, so as to, and then the energies, and his energy is actually drastically fallen, so that it can achieve a perfect energetically minimized structure, the structure which will theoretically be its folded structure. Okay, that's it. That's how the protein actually folds, and that is how it is so fast, because as a result, first of all, it simply folds into this particular thing, hydrophobic effect. Then it undergoes those electrostatic interaction. There are some several Coulombic interaction. There are some Lennard-Jones potential that comes into play, and all those interaction ultimately makes the protein move to this global minimum.
Okay.
Now, for this structuring or modeling of protein, there are actually several kind of there are majorly three domains of structural proteomics. One is the ab initio modeling, one is the homology modeling, and apart from that, we have the protein threading. Okay. Now, how do they work? How do they work? This protein or this modeling algorithms. So generally what happens, first of all, you have the new fold targets. Now in this new fold target, what the algorithm does, it simply tries to find a similar kind of folding pattern of the protein in the already established structure. And in the PDB database, we are going to take a look at PDB database later on. There are several kinds of folded structure, right? Because several people have been able to successfully structure a particular protein. They are able to crystallize a particular protein.
Yeah.
And according to their particular folding patterns, they are able to see if that they matches that particular fold.
Mhm.
And only when there are no similar folds in the PDB database, then that particular fold that the protein has is the new fold, right?
New fold.
It's a new fold because it's not present in any earlier structure. Now, to predict the newer fold, the structure which is not at all present, generally people assume the ab initio modeling. Why? Because the basic difference between ab initio modeling and homology modeling is that in homology modeling, the algorithm looks at all the other homologous structure of proteins that are whose structures are already solved.
Yeah.
Okay, and in ab initio modeling, only the proteins who does not have any homologous structure or who has lost their who have lost their homology, only those proteins are modeled in a ab initio model. So the new fold targets are actually modeled by the ab initio modeling. Ab initio means from scratch. From scratch. Okay. So that's how they model the protein. Now next we have the homology modeling. In the homology target what we have? We generally have a protein whose structure is already solved and whose structure is present in the PDB database. Apart from that, what we see, we also take a look at the and if not the structure, then we take a look at the sequence motifs. And there are sometimes the sequence motifs which are very similar, right? For example, a particular domain like a zinc finger domain. Many protein has these zinc finger domains into them, right?
Yeah.
And these zinc finger domains, they have an accurate and a particular structure, and they are not going to move a lot. They are not going to move a lot from that particular original structure. It's going to be that structure only.
Yeah.
So even if I don't have the homologous structure available, and if I found a zinc finger domain in my new protein, then what I will do, I will simply model that zinc finger domain as like the zinc finger structure. And like this, I'm going to find all the other kind of domains. There are several kind of domains available in the protein. And I'm going to take a look at all the PDB database, and I'm going to find out how the domains look like, or the sequence motif looks in that particular ratio in the particular protein, and I'm going to model that thing into my new protein. And that's why it is also called a comparative modeling, because I'm comparing the structure with someone else. If this structure is protein A, then I'm comparing this structure with the already solved structure of protein B or already solved structure of protein C. Okay. And apart from that, the third one is sometimes you're going to have some fold that are already present in the target. Now the difference between this homology and this fold is that in homology you are going to have a whole set of structure, a long domain or a huge domain, right, that is similar. But in this particular fold, in the fold recognition target, you are not going to find a homologous structure, but you are only going to find a short area, a very short area. Either it can be composed of 5 amino acid, it can be composed of 10 amino acid, but not more than 12. Okay, a very short area which has similar sequence. And we know, since the similar sequence are going to have the same chemical structure, they are going to fold similarly, right?
Yeah.
And this fold recognition target, we don't look at the homologous structure, we look at the similar folds that are present in the protein. Now, how can we know that this particular stretch of amino acid is going to fold in this way, or this particular stretch of amino acid is going to fold in that way? How can we know? Because there are these physical and chemical properties of amino acid allows them and lets them to behave like that. For example, there are several domains or amino acid which have the alpha helical forming propensity in them, and these are the malec. Malec means the one letter amino acid codes.
Okay.
Okay, that means methionine Alanine, leucine, glutamate and lysine. This is a short form of malate. So whenever you are going to find these amino acid, they generally tend to form alpha helix. So if you have a proper stretch of sequence, and in that particular sequence stretch you find that these amino acids are really forming and these are at that particular stretch it is rich in this particular malic amino acids. This domain is rich with malic. That then you know that that particular domain is surely going to fold like an alpha helix. Okay. So that's how the ab initio model predicts how a protein is going to behave. Again, along with malic. But if you have a proline or a glycine residue in between that malic area, you know that it is not going to form helix, because proline and glycine are helix breaker. But why is it? It's because proline or glycine are structurally immovable. They don't have that kind of flexibility that is required to form an alpha helix. Okay. And furthermore, because for alpha helix, what do we have to do? We must have a hydrogen bond between an oxygen or the amine group. But in glycine and proline, we don't have that kind of group. Because in proline, we know that its structure is simply like proline. How does proline look? Proline looks like this. So it does not have a free energy. It does not have a free hydrogen to donate. Okay. And again, this glycine also does not have any R group, right? It has it simply has a hydrogen. And it cannot donate that particular thing. And that's why they generally act as a helix breaker. And apart from that, this particular side chain, it also sterically interferes with the backbone of this preceding turn, because in this particular turn, you see, in this particular turn, what we have to do? In this particular turn, we must have a helix. In this particular helix, we must have a hydrogen bond that can simply bend, or a group that is long enough to bend. But if I have a very structurally conserved or not too flexible structure, then what will happen? Only a hydrogen. Then that particular hydrogen is not going to bend, right? And since it is not going to bend, it is going to disrupt this particular fold. And the same thing happens with both glycine and proline. Okay. So that's why even if you find a domain that is rich with this malic or apart from other amino acid, and since these glycine and proline are not only alpha helix breaker, they are also a beta sheet breaker also. So even in a beta sheet domain, if you have this proline and glycine, they are going to disrupt that particular domain. Okay, and even in that particular any fold, if you have this glycine and proline in a fold, they are going to tend to disrupt that fold also. Okay, and apart from that, obviously, like the same like alpha helix, there are certain amino acids that have this propensity to form beta sheet, and these are actually the very amino acids which have some large aromatic groups in them. For example, tyrosine, phenylalanine, and tryptophan. And also threonine, valine, isoleucine. They are all favored, and they are actually found in and around the beta strands. So even so this ab initio modeling, it first scans the whole protein structure or the sequence, and it finds these domains, and it actually accurately maps these domains which are higher, which can form or which are rich in this malic amino acid, or the domains which are rich in the amino acid which can form beta sheet, and then it simply assigns those structure to them. It first of all assigns the alpha helix domain and the beta sheet domain to them. And after this alpha helix and beta sheet domains assignment has been done, what it does, it then starts to build up the areas which are not forming either alpha helix or beta sheet, the non-folded regions. And then it needs to take the alpha helix domain, another alpha helix domain, and make them fall upon one another to make some tertiary build up the tertiary structure. Okay, but yeah, just a minute. Now the role of this proline in this beta sheet is a little bit different than kind of that of amino acid, that of the alpha helix. Because what happens is that whenever this beta sheets, in this beta sheet, the proline, whenever the prolines are found at the end of the beta sheet, what happens? They keeps the beta sheet stable. They keeps the beta sheet stable. Because if what happens in the edge, as I've told you, that proline and glycine, they disrupt the structure, right? So once they are present at the edge, they will simply disrupt the another beta sheet forming domain.
Yeah.
And if it fails to disrupt that beta sheet forming domain, then what will happen? Then there is actually an edge to edge connection between the two beta sheet domains, and that leads to the aggregation, and the protein precipitates out.
Okay.
And this particular thing is known as amyloid. Specifically, it is known as beta amyloid.
Okay.
Now, why this forming of amyloid is so harmful? Because this amyloid are not good. Because first of all, in your what happens is, in your body, if your protein simply precipitates out, you are going to lose the protein. It's going to lose its function. It's not going to first of all do its function. And secondly, if you have some protein aggregation in your body, that leads to some kind of diseases. Now, can you name one disease, a very great disease that is associated with amyloid? And it happens in brain.
In the brain?
Yeah, it happens in the brain.
I'm not sure.
Okay, it's Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome. Okay, so what happens is, and it happens due to the prion protein. Okay, so yeah, so you know the story how this Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome was actually discovered? Huh? Okay, so actually there was a scientist, and he found that this Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome, this Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome is actually a very degenerative, is a neurodegenerative brain disorder. Okay, and it simply leads to dementia and of course ultimately death. Now, a particular person found that this Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome was actually prevalent in a particular tribe in Africa, and only that particular tribe is having this Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome. Only those people in that tribe are facing this Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome, and the rest of them are not suffering from this particular disease. At that time, it was not known as Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome. The scientists discovered it and named it so. Now, so we went on to live with that particular tribe, because there is something different with that particular tribe, right? Those are only the members, and he found that if some other member of tribes, they join that particular tribe, then later on also they are facing that particular problem. So it's not some inborn disease, right? It's not some inborn disease. So it has something to do with the lifestyle. Now he later on found that the only thing different from that particular, now if you see that there are various kinds of tribe that lives in Africa, right? But rest of the tribes are really normal. They are not facing that particular problem. And the only thing different from that all those tribes with this particular tribe was that they have a typical syndrome, and that's it. After a war with a different tribe and all, these people used to behead the tribe, the member of those tribe, and eat their brains. Okay, they used to eat their brains, and that's the only thing different in them. That's their culture. They used to eat the brains of the opponent they have defeated. And we found out that in the brain, these prion proteins are already present.
Yeah.
And when these prion proteins, if you even have a single misfolded prion protein, then that particular misfolded prion protein is going to stimulate all the other prion proteins to be misfolded.
Okay.
Okay, and as all the prion protein misfolds, they misfold, they simply form an aggregate and form an amyloid structure,
Yeah.
and that leads to the formation of this dementia and all. So that's how this particular thing was discovered, and therefore these amyloid structures are really important because they also tells a lot about the folding of a particular protein, because you see this amyloid structure has nothing to do with the folding because the protein is properly folded, but it's just that only due to the edge to edge association between the two beta sheet folds, it leads to the aggregation. There is nothing else in them. Now these amyloid are actually formed by, there are multiple methods, but most commonly this is formed due to this protein structure misfolding, and that's why this prion disease and these are actually really important thing. And okay, so how do the protein actually models a structure? So first of all, there are generally 4 stages. First is the backbone prediction. Now the backbone prediction means that the general structure of your protein, the general backbone structure of your protein. Now, as you know, this backbone prediction can be done by 3 different ways: ab initio modeling, homology modeling, and protein threading. So after the backbone has been predicted, after you have predicted the several domains, several folds, which are going to be like either alpha helix or beta sheet or the unfolded regions, after it has been done, there are several areas that forms loops, right? And loops are the most difficult structure to predict. Why?
They have a lot of interactions.
They have a lot of
Interactions.
Yeah, obviously they have a lot of interactions, and apart from that, but not lot of interaction, because you know, if a particular structure has a lot of interaction, the structure will be stable, right?
Yeah.
Because it is attached, because it has multiple. Suppose if you are holding a particular, suppose in a train, you have traveled in train, right? So now the train moves a lot. So if I don't hold anything, I am also moving a lot. But if I hold the 2 rods in the train, I'll be much more stable, right?
Yeah.
So in the loops, if there are multiple connections, multiple interactions, then the loop will be stable. And if it is stable, it will be easier for me to predict the structure. But the loops are not stable. They don't have higher interactions. They simply fluctuate and move around a lot.
Okay.
And due to their movement, due to this huge movement, generally what happens? You fail to model or predict that particular structure. Because even if you have a particular domain, suppose you have a loop. Now, do you know the term B factor?
Sorry, what is that?
B factor. B factor.
No.
Now this B factor, what happens is, this B factor is a term that is associated with the crystallographic. Okay. Now this B factor means that what is the stability of your protein. By stability, I mean how much your protein is fluctuating.
Okay.
Okay. Now there are several residues. Each residue has been assigned a particular B factor. Now a higher B factor means that particular residue shuffles a lot. It simply moves here and there, here and there, here and there, here and there. It is not at all stable. And a fragment with a lower B factor means it is highly stable. So these loops have a very high B factor. They simply fluctuate a lot, and that's because these loops, they fail to create some connections. They don't have a proper structure. They don't have a proper fold, and as they lack this fold, they simply move here and there, and that's why it is really difficult to get a snapshot of those. And if you can't get a snapshot in NMR, what happens? In NMR, how do we solve a structure? In NMR, we generally solve a structure by having this, by taking several snapshots or several pictures of a protein and then averaging them out. Now, if at each picture the protein or that particular fold simply moves from A to B to C to D and AF, then are you going to get a good average structure?
No.
No. So that's why it is really difficult to get a picture of those loops. And since these loops don't have a particular structure, their structure can be anything. Their structure can be anything. And that's why it is really difficult to model the loops. So that's in the second stage, what we do, we model, or the algorithm model the loop according to the structure of the rest of the protein. And after that, it simply does the side chain packing. Because the side chains, are the main thing that actually forms the interactions. And even if a particular protein, the particular protein is in the surface, or amino acid is the surface, then the side chains can be in two, it can actually interact in either two ways. It can either interact with some other amino acid in the protein, or it can be freely available in the surface to make interaction with the other proteins, right? Now if you have too many side chains exposed outside, then what will happen? It is going to make more interactions than it usually does in the cell.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's why it is also important to do the side chain packing. And after the side chain has been packed, lastly the whole structure is again refined, and this refinement is done by checking the phi psi angles of each amino acids,
Okay. Mhm.
and if all the phi psi angles are lying in their respective allowed regions or not. And if they are lying in the allowed regions, and if it has a bare minimized minimum energy, then we know for sure that this is the final model structure, which needs no editing. Okay, so this is the basic idea about protein structure prediction. So first of all, we'll start with the ab initio modeling. What is ab initio modeling and all? Now, as you know that this, as I've told you, that ab initio means from scratch. Okay, so that means that I am applying and starting this protein structure from scratch. I don't have anything. It's the basic thing that I have, and I only have the sequence of proteins. That's all. I don't have anything else, only the sequence. Now all we have to do is to play around with this particular sequence. And this was the first thing that was actually developed, because and to be frank, this ab initio modeling is the only most accurate modeling ever.
Okay.
You know why?
Because everything is done from scratch.
Yes, because this in homology modeling, what I am doing, I am modeling the structure by taking a look at another protein. But that's not how the protein works. Each protein is different. Though they might share the same homology, though they might share the same function, it's not always true that they must have same kind of structure also.
Yeah.
Because had they have same kind of structure, then our body wouldn't have evolved to develop another kind of protein like that. It would have kept that original protein, it would have conserved that original sequence. But it's different because there are some reason, right? We are yet to find out those difference, why it is different, and these questions are still not answered. But ab initio modeling is the most accurate thing, because the proteins in our body also, they actually fold by utilizing the chemical interactions, right? The hydrophobic interaction, hydrogen interaction, hydrogen bonds, then the Lennard-Jones potential, by using the Coulombic interactions, and these are the interactions that, or the chemical interactions that the protein really uses. Not only these, apart from that, there are several other kind of interactions that protein uses to model or build a structure. And this ab initio modeling, we only employ these interactions to see and model a structure, and that's why this ab initio modeling is the most accurate, but it does not give you a most accurate structure. Why is that? Because of the difference between the mathematical equation and the computer programming. Because your algorithm is only as good as the programmer, right?
Yeah.
So it actually depends upon the programmer to see if he can accurately use the mathematical equation, or you can accurately develop a program based on that particular mathematical equation. And there are several kind of equations that are still not mathematically completed, and even every day these equations are being developed each day, because as more and more people find more they do research with this interaction, and they find more factors that are associated with this kind of energies and this kind of interactions, and they feed this information into their programs. And that's why this program, as the days goes on, these programs are becoming much more efficient, but we are still a long way from the accurate structure prediction, because there are several kind of interaction that are still yet to be discovered, that are found in the protein, that are still yet to be discovered. And if you can't discover them, you can't mathematically predict them, and if you can't mathematically predict them, you can't use their sequence, and if you can't use their sequence, you know that you can't use them as a program.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why this is very important, and this abelian modeling was first actually developed by Anfinsen, and he actually developed this Anfinsen not by the Coulombic interactions or these different kind of interactions. He developed it on the basis of thermodynamics, purely on the basis of thermodynamics. Okay, so what did he predict? What did he predict actually? The first, he predicted that this the whole structure of the protein, this whole structure of the protein must come down to a bare minimum structure to get a properly folded structure, because if there is any kind of higher energy in it, then it is going to be unfolded. It cannot be kept in a perfectly globular, it cannot assume a globular structure under higher energy. To get a properly globular energy, it must have a minimum amount of energy, and that's the first thing that he proposed. And it's really true. And it's really true. And one thing that people, can you name one thing that we know is for sure is true, but there is no mathematical validation for that particular thing? One thing that governs each and every one of us, every lifestyle, every choices, every interactions, that particular thing that governs everything, but it is still not mathematically validated.
Atoms?
Not atoms, the thermodynamics.
Thermo.
Because this whole world, even the proteins are actually run by this thermodynamics. Starting from the gravitational energy to those big, to smallest interaction like this van der Waals interaction. All is done by this thermodynamics. But this thermodynamics is the only thing that is yet to be mathematically validated, because this is something that cannot be validated. It is only thing that can only be assumed, it can only be predicted, but it cannot be validated. But and we know that in scientific community we actually don't take anything seriously unless it is validated, right? And the only exception is this thermodynamics. So so I will ask you personally that before going to this drug discovery and all, please read this thermodynamics very good. Okay, because thermodynamics is the one thing that you are going to require at each step. Even if you study a drug, and if you do the bioinformatics, if you study the protein interaction, anything like that, you are going to need this thermodynamics. Okay, so do study thermodynamics very well. And there is a book, I'm forgetting the name of the books, remind me the next time, and I will let you know the name of a book that you can read for thermodynamics.
I think I have a thermodynamics. I've already taken a class on it, so I'll just read from there.
Okay, fine. Then it's good. Yes, just a minute. Now, so I've already discussed this, how this particular thing works, right? The abelian modeling, it simply checks the sequence of your protein, And after that sequence of the protein, it simply assumes those and finds those areas which are reaching either in the alpha helical forming domains or the beta sheet forming domains, and it gives them that particular structure. And after each domain has been given the particular structure, the domain has been predicted, it then generates a series of scores, and the scores actually predict, and there are some threshold that the score must have, and if that particular fold can cross that particular threshold of score, then that particular domain structure is given to him, and later on it is finally taken as a predicted structure of your and it is verified. Okay, and it is verified by using the Ramachandran plot to
Okay.
see that each and every amino acid is present in the allowed regions or not. And even if you miss some amino acid that are not in the allowed region, then there are several softwares with which you can change the phi-psi angles of your amino acids.
Okay.
Like Schrodinger, you can use that to change the phi-psi angles, and once you change the phi-psi angle of a particular stretch, the whole structure is going to modify, but not by much, only by a very few angstrom. The whole structure is going to change its structure by few angstrom, and after all the afterward all the amino acids have changed the structure. Again, it is predicted to see if all the structures, all the phi-psi angles in the allowed are present in the allowed regions or not. Okay, like this, the whole structure is modeled, then it is assessed, then it is verified, then it is again modeled, assessed, verified, and this thing goes in cycle until unless you have a final model structure. Okay. Now, apart from that, we have several kind of domains that or servers that can actually predict the that can predict your whether this particular structure you are going to have can it be is it going to have a what is the secondary structure for protein. There are several things. So first of all, I'm going to just show you one thing. Just click on that particular link.
Should I repeat it?
No, I will let you know. I will let you know about this particular server when we discuss this databases. Okay, because there's a lot to discuss on this. I'm just sending you a structure of a protein, the sequence of a protein. Okay, so just copy paste this sequence into that Chauman-Fastman domain. Okay, so first of all, this particular server was actually developed by, as a name predicts, this is developed by Chauman-Fastman, and he developed an algorithm to predict the secondary structure of your protein.
Okay.
Now you have to upload your sequence of your protein in the FASTA format. Now you know what is FASTA format?
Yeah.
Okay, so that means in FASTA format, all we have to do is give a greater than sign, right? And after that, the sequence will start from the next line. So just give a greater than sign, and in the greater than sign you can write anything. Suppose protein 1.
Name of the sequence.
Name of the sequence or name of the protein. So I have written protein 1, and then give the sequence on the next line. So, and simply click on predict. Now what this Chauman-Fastman did is actually he established this server so that it can actually take a look at all these amino acid and predict the secondary structure of each and every domain. Okay.
Yeah.
So what it does, you have clicked it.
Yeah. I got it.
So see what it does. It simply gives that this particular methionine. I have told you malate, right? So the methionine, that methionine forms helix.
Yeah.
So see, it has assumed that this methionine will have a helix
Helix.
option, but
Uh-huh.
it also predicts that this methionine can also form a E means beta sheet.
Okay.
Okay, E means beta sheet, H means helix,
Helix.
T means turns, and C are the coils.
Okay.
Okay,
What does
coils.
T stand for? Oh, turn.
Turns,
Okay.
the turns. And C means the coils. Means a random
Got
structure.
it.
Now this also says that this methionine can take part in a helix and it can also take part in a beta sheet. But finally it actually forms helix. Why? Because the helix forming region is much stronger than the beta sheet forming regions, because only these three amino acids can form beta sheet, which is not and what will happen, because and since this is a long stretch of alpha helix domain, it is this alpha helix is going to overpower the beta sheet and they are going to
Yeah.
form this helix. And it predicts that this particular lysine, though this lysine might we know that lysine forms the helix, right?
Think. Oh, glycine.
Lysine, K
Lysine.
stands for lysine.
Okay.
K stands for lysine, so lysine forms the helix. But
Yeah.
see, in this case the lysine is actually taking part in the turn. It is forming a
Turn.
turn. It is forming a turn. It is not forming a helix. And that's because you have a glycine here. Just beside the lysine you have a
Glycine.
glycine. So it's breaking up the helix from that part of point. It's breaking up that helix from that particular point. So like this, it will simply give you a whole list of what will be the what the how the secondary structure is going to look like, how can the why the secondary structure will look like this and all. And these informations are really important. You know why?
To determine the right factor, so we can predict where the turns, the helix, and the beta sheet part.
Yes, obviously that's the one thing that why do you need this. But the other thing is that when you are doing when you are doing studying proteomics or the drug discovery platform, you know, in bioinformatics, this proteomics and drug discovery, they work hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you in drug discovery we need to design a drug or a ligand that can accurately bind and specifically bind to your protein.
Yeah.
And by protein I don't mean anywhere on the protein, only onto some perfect areas where we need that particular ligand to bind to. It might be an active site, or it might be another kind of groove which is not active site, but I require that it must bind to those areas. For example, in insulin, you know that insulin is also a molecule. uh, it is given as a drug, right?
Yeah.
It is given as a drug. So people who are suffering from this diabetes, a severe kind of they have to take insulins. Now
Yeah.
sometimes, now what is a why is it a loss industry? Because these insulins that you take up, they are available in small tiny bottles in the liquid form, right? You have to
Yeah.
inject them into your body.
Yeah.
But these insulins, they actually tend to aggregate. And if you buy,
Okay.
suppose if you are buying a bottle of and each generally cost around 400 to 300. So suppose a round figure, it's costing around 100 rupees, okay? And
Yeah.
among if it has 100 molecules of insulin, now among that 100 molecules of insulin, 10 molecules are going to be get aggregated and they are going to precipitate out in the bottle. So that means there is a loss of that insulin that you are unable to
Yeah.
use. And if this, now if you assume that that's only for a particular subset of for only a particular set, but if you assume that how much insulin is lost like this all over India, you are going to find that it's actually a multi-billion-dollar project that is getting lost,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So people like the insulin industry, they actually tried to come up with a particular fragment of drug that could prevent the insulin aggregation.
Okay.
So people started working out why this insulin is getting aggregated and all, and they found out that this insulin is getting aggregated because due to the formation of a particular amino acid called N. And what does N stands for?
Methionine?
Huh?
Methionine?
I'm not getting you.
Is it methionine?
No, not M. N.
N?
N stands for Nilanjan. N.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know what.
It's an asparagine.
Okay.
Okay, it's an asparagine. It is seen that the 23rd amino acid is actually forms a interaction and with another amino acid, and due to that interaction, this whole insulin gets aggregated and it gets precipitated out.
Okay.
So people has tried to come up with a particular small ligand that can actually bind to this 23rd amino acid and prevent it from making any kind of interaction. Because if I can simply cap that particular amino acid, what will happen? It is not going to interact with anything, and as a result, that 10% of insulin in the bottle is not going to get precipitated out.
Yeah.
Now people have successfully developed this, not successfully, but almost they have developed a molecule that could actually lower this precipitation by 5%.
Okay.
So recently I actually worked with a particular, I also developed a particular, we developed a particular molecule that could actually interact with this insulin and prevent it from getting aggregated. Now why it is different from the rest of the stuff? Because the rest of the stuff, it actually gained entry into your body along with the insulin.
Yeah.
But our molecule fails to enter your cell, so only the insulin, it will simply guide the insulin to your cell, where the insulin will move into the cell, but my protein will simply that particular peptide is going to be left off in the outside the cell membrane. Because you know that even though they might be non-toxic, but having those small ligands in your body is not a good thing, because they can make some non-specific interactions, right? So that's why knowing a particular fold is highly important, because in my case I developed a particular peptide that could effectively bind to that 23rd amino acid, and that part was a part of beta sheet. That amino acid was part of beta sheet. So earlier when I developed, in the very beginning, when I developed a particular peptide, it failed to interact with that particular thing. And but according to thermodynamics and according to all the chemistry, that should interact. They have all the basic chemical properties that should make it very prevalent interactions. But ultimately we found out that this particular moiety was not attacking it because of that beta sheet structure. Due to that beta sheet structure, the residue was protecting some other other atoms in that particular other atoms that were failing to make that interaction. So then we needed to tweak the ligand so that it could actually bind to a beta sheet. We had to make it a beta sheet specific ligand, and in that beta sheet, not to any beta sheet, but also only to a asparagine in a beta sheet. So that's why this knowing this residues, knowing the secondary structure is really important, because the amino acid, they behave differently in different structure. The amino acid in alpha helix will behave differently, and the same amino acid in a beta sheet, it will behave differently. Okay. So this is and ultimately you are going to see, at the end you are going to get a percentage of what your protein has. I mean, what is the structure of protein? So you see, it has 91.1% of amino acid that are present in the as a helix form.
Yeah.
Only 21% will be in a beta sheet form, and the rest 11% will be in a turns. And these are the residues. That means 328 residues are helix, 76 residues are beta sheet, and 41 residues are turns. Okay, that's how this Chow and Fasman domain server is really important, but it is a little bit outdated. It's a little bit outdated, and we generally tend to avoid it. not avoid it. To just to know a secondary structure, this is a perfect thing, because all the other servers that we're going to come up, they are actually, they take a since they give you a detailed result, they take much of your time.
Okay.
So if you need to see just the basic secondary structure of a protein, these are the servers that you need to see to.
Okay.
Okay. Now, so this is the one thing. Now, so apart from that, we also have some other kind of sequence like this predict protein and all, that we are going to take a look at on the next day. Okay. Now this. So how do you do this proteomics? So we know. Just a bit. So this proteomics, so once you have your protein at your hand, what do? We simply have to first of all get all the proteins out, right?
Yeah.
And after we get all the proteins out by protein purification, we have to segregate the protein,
Yeah.
because I am getting a protein in a mixture, so you have to segregate the protein, and this segregation is done by electrophoresis. Now generally we perform 1D or 2D electrophoresis to segregate the proteins. And after the proteins have been segregated, we need to purify each of those segregated protein from the gel. From the gel, we need to segregate out the proteins, and we need to identify the proteins. And for identifying of the proteins, we need to perform the mass spectroscopy. Okay. So do you have the idea about this electrophoresis and mass spectroscopy?
Yeah.
Oh, you know mass spectroscopy and electrophoresis, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Okay, then I'm not going to go detail about how to perform mass spectroscopy and all. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the next day, we're going to start with the predict protein server, and we're going to take the thing from the mass spectroscopy. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Sure. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.